So let me introduce Jonas. Jonas Dupuich began his bonsai journey over 20 years ago, doesn't look old enough, and has studied with Boone Manakatar. I've screwed it up. Manakatar for 20 years. During that time, he became the founding member of Bay Island Bonsai. He started Bonsai Tonight and has an active blog where he posts weekly articles, interviews, and how-to videos, as well as he has a podcast as well. And I encourage you to sign up to get his blog on Bonsai Tonight. Last year, Jonas and Eric Schrader launched the Pacific Bonsai Expo, and I highly encourage you to attend it next year. It was amazing. It will be in Oakland, probably in the end of October. He prides himself on bonsai display and styling techniques. Tonight he's going to be talking about pot selection. It's going to be lots of fun and interactive, and I hope that you will partake in the questions polling that he is going to offer us. So without further ado, Jonas, take over when you are ready.
So everything ready on your end to get going?
Ready on my end.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. As Dodie said, I'm Jonas Dupuich, and tonight we're going to talk about selecting containers for our trees. This is a fun topic because there are a near bottomless numbers of kind of combinations of species, styles, and containers that are available to us these days. And I know that while it always may seem that there's an easy feeling we can fall back on about whether or not we like the way something is connected, there actually are some pretty strong conventions that guide the selection of which containers we're going to be using for our trees. I think of them as conventions more than rules, in that depending on which shows you go to around the world, you're going to see a certain types of pairings. And so what we're going to cover tonight is going to be pairings that I would expect to see in fairly traditional or conservative bonsai events. Now, that said, this happens to be a fairly interesting time for bonsai pot or bonsai containers, in that there are many fun alternatives to the traditional choices. And so we will talk about that less tonight, because the idea is start out with a grounding of what people have kind of come to expect over years, and talk about why different choices might work better or worse with different trees. And then from there, that can provide a great base for further exploration and experimentation with some really fun and novel designs. So that's kind of what we want to cover tonight. Yes, there will be multiple quizzes throughout, so we will get plenty of opportunity for you all to provide feedback. And as far as questions go, you are willing, or we are willing to, field questions throughout this presentation. Your primary way of doing that, as Dodie said, will be giving us the chat. And if you have maybe a longer, more detailed thing, we might try letting you just speak up and we'll have a more direct interaction. So with that, let us know if there's anything else we need to do before we go any further. I saw some notes on volume. Are things too quiet right now?
I hear you just fine. I think you're fine. Someone else couldn't hear it, I think. You sound good to others. Everyone's saying.
Does it still sound good? Any different? Any better? Any worse?
You sound fine.
Okay. Well, do let me know. Great. Well, one of the first things I wanted to start with is the most straightforward, which is simply what our some of our kind of basic options are for containers, because I know that there are lots of different types of containers, and we don't always have the fresh language for that. And so I wanted to start out right here with what's known as the moko shape, which is kind of an oval with pinched sides on it. And so these are the same containers photographed from above and from the front. And so you can see the difference between a moko and an oval in that it's a modified type of oval. These are all unglazed pots, and they do a really good job showing you some different things we look at for containers. The clay color is radically different. We have a yellowish brown clay, a reddish clay and a brown clay. Interestingly, we won't really go into, unless questions come up, who the makers are of the pots or the age of the pots, but just for example, the first pot is actually, I believe it's a first generation Yamaki pot, so a very old Japanese, possibly antique container, the one on the left, the Moko. The container on the right is a Chinese antique, another very old container. And the one on the right is actually made by Michael Hagedorn. That's a Crataegus container.
I
So
did have
some other,
one quick question. One was,
yeah.
how many drainage holes should a pot have?
Ah, adequate drainage holes to allow excess moisture to drain out of the bottom of the pot. What I can say about that topic, if you're interested in making pots, for instance, is two things come to mind. One, you want to make sure the drainage holes are at the lowest point in the container. On a lot of antique pots, you'll have drainage holes that'll be up on a raised up part of the pot, which means you'll have standing water. You don't want standing water in the pot because very few species will appreciate that. The other thing is we have very different tie down techniques for whether you have 1, 2, 3, 4 or more holes. Each of those different patterns has kind of different recommended approaches for how you wire those, wire the trees into those different pots. And so 1 is fine, 3 is better, and 4 is best for giving you options. When I have less expensive pots, I drill holes constantly in the bottom of the pot so that I can get the tie-down wires precisely where I want them. Next up, we have rectangles. And the reason I have a few different rectangles here is to show that there's a giant family of rectangles, and we often choose our rectangles for really specific characteristics they have. As you can see, whether from the top or from the front, these containers have very, very different characteristics. And I would actually match them with trees that have very different characteristics. And so on the left, we have a handmade container by Gyozan, one of the top potters in Japan, another Chinese antique in the middle, and it looks like actually another Gyozan over on the right. And so same maker, similar clay on the left and right, but very, very different feeling. And so we're going to be making decisions about maybe the size of the trunk of the tree and the style of the tree that makes a good match for these containers based on what we have to work with in the container. And for those who don't know, the container in the middle, being a Chinese antique with 2 drainage holes, sometimes you won't even have that. That's one mark of an older container, whereas the ones on the left and right were made specifically for bonsai. And the kind of cute little shapes in the middle signify that it's a handmade container by the pot maker. And so that's one way at a glance to kind of think about the quality of the pot. All right. So here I have kind of, and they're all round, or we have one square pot in there, but these are all containers that are appropriate for cascade or semi-cascade bonsai. When you have a container that is roughly 1-to-1 in dimensions when you look from above, and so that could be a square, a hexagon, an octagon, a circle, a lotus shape, scalloped edges, any of those are appropriate for a cascade and semi-cascade bonsai. And so this would be the first shape pot that I would say we have very strong conventions for what kind of trees are going to go into these containers. We also have kind of a mix of glazed and unglazed, and we'll be going through in more detail about what we think it makes a good match for each of those. I think the top left pot is might be a shuho, just kind of a standard glazed pot from Japan. The top middle is an antique. If you look closely, you'll see there's a face in the feet of the container. And so when we start thinking about containers for exhibits, not only are we looking for appropriate size, we're actually kind of assuming appropriate size and style, but we're actually considering pot quality. Does the pot itself have inherent characteristics that are really high quality? Top right's a Michael Hagedorn pot, continuing clockwise. Bottom right would be an old, I think, first generation Yamaki, a Roy Minarai bottom central, and then another Gyozan bottom left. All right, so what do you all notice about the conifers? Possibly that they are all in unglazed containers. By far, the number one most common convention is that unglazed containers tend to be a very good match for conifers. And that's because conifers are always green. There are some exceptions to that, but when you have an evergreen conifer, greens tend to look nice with the earth tones that we get in natural clay. Now, the three containers here have very different characteristics, and we can also see that the trees themselves have very different characteristics. Prominent deadwood for the cedar on the left, no deadwood, very soft feeling for the hinoki in the middle, and that's in an oval rather than a rectangle. And then really dramatic movement and dramatic deadwood features for the juniper on the right, which is very likely in a maruhei container, a really common choice for, or when you have that yellow clay, that's often who the maker happens to be. You can also start to see some other details. We have kind of maybe a lower level of refinement on the feet in the middle pot. They're very informal legs, whereas the tree on the left has a much more formal container where very careful, even more symmetrical forms on the bottom where the feet are give this tree a more elegant feeling, and it kind of makes you think twice about what kind of tree is going to go into that. As we go through other examples, you're going to have the ability to find out if you like the rougher trees with rougher pots or smoother pots with smoother trees. And again, feel free to interrupt or type in questions as they come up. And so what are some characteristics you find in these deciduous trees? Looks like we have a Japanese maple on the left, Alcova serrata in the middle, and not sure what that is on the right. A couple different options. Of course, it's also hidden behind another window for me here. Oh, it looks like some kind of an elm on the right there. And so the obvious answer isn't necessarily that they're all in cream colored pots, but that they're all in shallow pots, they're all in oval pots, and they're all in glazed pots. And I would say, all things being equal, those are really strong conventions for deciduous trees. Now, all of these are in leaf. And when you think of a container, selecting a container for a deciduous tree, one of the biggest things to consider is what type of year do you want the tree to look good? If you're showing a tree in leaf, you might want to have one color pot. If you're showing it out of leaf, you might want to have another color container. And so these photos were all taken from kind of mid-season shows, which is typically the off-season in Japan, but there are occasional shows that run roughly April through October in Japan. But most of the biggest shows are all between November through February, so we can see deciduous trees without leaves. So as you're picking your containers, think about what kind of season you're going to be showing them. And it's interesting how many end up in these cream containers because it gives a little pop. A darker color with the darker leaves aren't always a good fit because they kind of convey the same idea, and you get a little bit less contrast going that way. And now we have broadleaf evergreen, and I wanted to provide a defoliated and non-defoliated example of this because you actually do see broadleaf evergreens. It's literally in the name that they always have green on them. But you will find examples where there's one show in Japan, for example, that actually displays azaleas fully defoliated so you can appreciate the structure of the tree. As we see on the tree on the left, it has been, the owner opted to show the tree fully defoliated for a very specific reason. And if you look at the very tiny sliver of scroll-like painting in the background, you'll see octopus tentacles. And so what the owner of this tree is doing is kind of calling attention to the branch structure, which has this kind of crazy undulating form and many, many branches that emerge from the same spot. Super sidebar, but well, to take a page out of history, for I believe 200 to 300 years in Japan, the most popular style of bonsai was actually known as octopus style. And now I'll let you fill in the blanks what those trees might have looked like. I doubt they included anything like this ficus here, but that kind of tells you where people's heads were when starting out in bonsai in the probably 17th and 18th century, into the 19th century, I guess, as well. It's only in the last 100, 150 years that our more modern conceptions of bonsai styles became more popular. So kind of fun that the owner of this tree kind of calls attention not only to the branch structure by defoliating, but also the history. The other thing you'll notice is that one is in a glazed pot, one is in an unglazed pot. And I think it's perfectly acceptable to choose either glazed or unglazed containers for broadleaf evergreens. It really will have a big effect on what kind of features you want to play up or play down in the trees. And so for the tree on the left, I noticed that the cream color really picks up on the bark of the tree. And I think that's a really good example of using a color of the pot to reinforce a color that we see in the tree. And having a nice layer of green moss in the middle gives just enough of a break so that we have these two discrete elements that kind of play off each other. Whereas the broadleaf on the right, we have a little bit of deadwood, but it's not too bright white. It's a more natural wood color. And we have some natural bark in there as well. The pot is darker than both of those. And so I think the darker brown on the pot actually makes a really nice contrast with the green foliage, and then lets the trunk and deadwood provide more contrast to the live wood as well as the container, rather than blend in with any of those. So a lot of ways to go with the broadleaves, and I think they can be really fun. Azaleas in this country are often shown with glazed containers. In Japan, they're most typically shown in unglazed containers. Oaks I've seen in lots of different containers, and likewise with olives, but I think I see olives far more with unglazed containers because they often feature deadwood, and things with deadwood far more often end up in unglazed containers because you get more contrast between the clay and the wood rather than the more distracting bright color in the deadwood and bright color in the container. Now, we talked about this a little bit when we were looking at the round and square pots. And so if I were to ask what it is that makes us have deeper pots for our cascades and semi-cascade bonsai, the short answer is simply what provides stability. And the reason we don't use shallow trees is, one, practical, it gets the trees up a little higher. And number two, it provides counterbalance. Now, many of you are wondering, why are there no tall, slender containers? I thought those were cascade pots, and they are. Tall, slender cascade pots, whether round or square, were popular for a very long time, up until 40 or 50 years ago. And so in the last 40 or 50 years, the containers have, in general, not really been much deeper than they are wide. And so you can see the square pot at left is almost precisely as tall as it is wide at the lip. The circle in the middle is actually wider than it is deep. And the kind of white pine on the right is also wider than it is deep. And I'd ask if you have any favorites or non-favorites, because we have a very plain single panel square in the left, a much more modern and organic form with a lighter clay in the middle, and then we have an antique container on the right. So I'm curious if any of you have any comments, if there's anything you like or don't like about any of these, and whether or not they do or don't suit these trees kind of in particular. Even I see Dodie thinking about this one.
Yeah, yeah. Now I like the middle one. Love the middle one. Like the one on the left. I like the middle one personally.
So since you're on the mic, what is it about the middle one that stands out?
I like the ruggedness of it, and to me it goes with the trunk.
And so that's one of the biggest things to consider. I think the owner took the exact same approach. They were enamored of the rough character of the bark, and they decided to go with an organic form that kind of reinforced that. Then the question is there too much repetition of form or not enough? And so I think that's one thing that appeals to people who prefer, say, the pots on the left or right, where you have a far more kind of blank slate canvas. It's more grounding and less dramatic. You also may notice that the tree in the middle is on a very linerectal stand, where you've got pretty much all straight lines, orthogonal forms, and very slender pegs on it. And then you've got this really organic shape in the container and in the trunk. On the left, it would be a little weird to have an organic shape on the pot because we have a really twisty, craggy trunk, and we've got a root stand. And so it's nice to have a little break. The pot on the right is kind of the most refined or elegant of the three. And it's a kind of a common choice for white pines to do something like that. But I'd say a more contemporary approach, people would want a rougher texture, maybe a different color clay, and maybe more irregular or even geometric features. And so a lot of this goes to kind of what you're kind of working on. Now, there's a good comment just came in from Bryce about the container on the left not necessarily being a good complement for the Nabari, and that a round pot might bring that out better. And I'd say, yeah, it definitely would bring that out better. And then what you have to ask are, if it is a rounded pot, does it have straight sides, tapered sides, sides that are more convex and curve inward, much like the straight sides do now, or more convex, like the forms in the center and on the right? The left and right trees would look better in each other's pots.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really interesting. The tree on the right has so many soft peach features, and in general, white pines have such soft features that they can work in the squares, but people, I think, more instinctively reach for softer, rounder shapes because of that. But I'd be curious to see those pots kind of swapped. The dimensions of the pot on the right. And so notice how quickly we can get really picky about these things, because the pot on the left is more one-to-one in dimensions and the pot on the far right is wider than it is deep. I think a wider tree or a wider pot might look funnier with the black pine on the left because it has such a heavy silhouette. There's no gaps between the foliage. It's a just flat horizontal line at the base of the foliage. It might exaggerate the whole horizontal feeling of the tree and not the up, down, or reaching feeling that we typically want to see in a cascade. Of course, we could also be really picky and then talk about the silhouette kind of going at the same angles, left and right, which really just interrupt any flow or life we'd have in that black pine on the left. Now, but if we could have that right-hand pot a little narrower, that could be a really pretty option for the black pine on the left. So all good comments. And what's funny is just getting a little bit of feedback about that one tree gives a whole bunch of different kind of perspectives about how it might want to work. So you're all on the right track, and this is going to help you out when you get to the quizzes, which are actually coming up fairly soon. To say more about the trunks is probably one of the tip-top selling kinds of pots you can buy are shallow rounds. And I will say that by far the number one reason for that is that they're fun and straightforward to make. And so people tend to sell and produce lots of shallow round containers. I would say they are by far the most overused shape, and you'll have heard that from a lot of people other than me. And I will also suggest that we actually have far fewer trees that are well suited to round containers than almost any other shape. And so in general, when we have a shallow round container, what we're suggesting to the viewer is a couple different things. Number one, the point of the tree is to have a trunk with interesting movement. That's kind of why we're looking at this bonsai. And here's why round is a good match for that. The shape of the pot suggests how certain we are about the front of the tree. If the tree looks interesting from all angles, a round pot will not suggest to the viewer a strong opinion about what angle from which we view that tree. An oval more slightly orients us toward the center or front of the tree, and rectangles very positively say, look at me here, stand there, look there. And so that's one way we don't often think of it, but the shape of the pot, the basic shape, is really strongly signifying how we are looking at the tree and what that tree has to offer. Now we have kind of a lot of deadwood on this grafted white pine on the left. That tree's actually lived on both coasts of the United States. It's currently on the East Coast. And we have a very young exposed root tree on the right, where the point of the tree is less the movement, but more the kind of interesting, more sinuous form of the kind of exposed roots on that tree. The tree in the middle is a great example because it's not necessarily about movement as much as it's about very unusual style and shape. It's almost perfectly straight until it gets really interesting it's more or less a two-branch design. We have kind of an apex or upper branch and a lower branch, but the bark is fantastic. The deadwood is appropriate based on where the foliage is, and it's just a fun, unusual tree that invites us to kind of give it a second look. So this is what I see when you use a shallow round pot is you're telling me this isn't a full tree, this isn't a big trunk tree, it's not a heavy tree. And no, you didn't pick around because you haven't decided on the front. You've picked around because the tree itself has something more to say, which is, no, really, I don't have a best side. Look at me from all these different sides. Do any of these seem inappropriate in circles, or is it kind of understandable why these three ended up in the round pots? Yeah, comment about the pot echoing the loopy root. And I think playing up the shapes in the trunk is kind of a common thing. The probably a rejo pot in the middle, it's really more of a tray for the middle tree and it disappears. It more becomes kind of just a practical vessel for us kind of positioning the tree right there. Whereas we have a very formal pot, which for a circle gives us the absolute strongest indication possible. And that is a bullet pot with a pattern of bullets, or a drum pot where the pattern of the bullets is very directly pointing forward and it lines up with the foot even better. All right, here we are moving away from the rounds to Shohin.
I have a question first.
Yeah.
What would you have chosen for the tree on the right, on the previous slide?
Let's see. Oh, I would have kept it in a round pot.
I don't know if you went back to it or not.
There we go. You know, I probably would choose a slightly less formal container. I'm trying to think what pot the tree's in right now. I would probably choose a less formal container, but it wouldn't be shallow. So for the left-hand tree, Dodie?
No,
White
it was the
pine?
right-hand tree.
Oh, the right-hand tree.
Yeah.
I would choose a little lighter feeling container. But I will say what I like best about the container is that it's informal. And so that's an old duck bowl. That's kind of a Chinese antique container, or at least a newer pot made to look like a Chinese antique. And it's one of those, it's either a lid from an old pot or an old duck bowl that's been kind of drilled out and made into a container. And it's a little bit heavy feeling considering that the thickness of the clay is not far off the thickness of those roots. So I would probably want just a little less prominent size and shape wise. It's actually really good. I would just want just a slightly lighter feeling. I wouldn't want a perfectly pretty pot, but if maybe the right pretty pot could work, I would not want a drum pot like the one on the left, for instance. Did you have any ideas about what might be a good fit for it?
Not me, no. But I had another question that was very good is if circular pots are overused,
David's
what's an
question.
underused style that people should consider more?
Yeah, good question, David. You know, I think what's most underused is actually high quality pots in exhibits. I think that's what's underused. Um, if the point of the tree is great age, it looks really weird to put old trees in brand new pots when you're kind of conditioned to seeing old containers for old trees. I think the reason we find circular pots overused is that those trees would be much better served in non-circular pots, whereas ovals and rectangles are actually really, they're not overused as much, I'd say. They're not, but they're definitely not underused. Oh, and then we have rocks or slabs. We'll definitely get to rocks and slabs. Um, I don't know that I'd want to put an exposed root on a rock. Could potentially go in a slab if you're making kind of a landscape of it. But if the whole point of rock planting is that the rock is kind of serving as a trunk, and the point of exposed roots are that the roots are serving as a trunk, it's kind of weird if you have two things serving as the focal point, and they might compete with each other a little bit. And that's why really the trunk is the star, and we're just letting it be the star by having the focus be on the trunk, not the container for these guys. In round pot, should the apex be outside the edge of the pot? I don't really think of where I want the apex of the tree when I use round pots, but I very strongly want to put the base of the trunk in the middle of a round container. And the reason for that is when you have a circle or a square or a 6 or 8 sided container, it can look really funny when the trunk isn't centered in that. When you have a rectangular oval, you definitely can take a right-leaning tree, position it over to the left. That gives you a feeling of balance. But when you have a round pot and it's kind of off to the side, it can look really, really funny.
Someone asked
Um,
about the health of the tree.
so the way I look at healthiest for the tree is I'd frame that another way and say, in what shape container is it easiest to keep the tree healthy? And then I'll just say, in general, the more overall space for the roots, the easier it is to keep that tree healthy. You can keep trees healthy in all kinds of things. And that's totally fine, but it's more like how much work you're going to put into it. Another comment about a tree with a prominent root on a slanted stone, and that's what made it really stand out to people. When you have trees with prominent features, there's lots of ways to play those up. Often prominent roots can just either A, not fit in a container, and that's why you have to fall back on something like a stone, or they can look ridiculous in a container, because when you have a tree with a prominent root, what most people would call that in Japan is a flawed tree, and it would have much lower value. And so if we're going to make lemonade out of that lemon, we're going to find whatever container is going to try to turn that lemon into something more of a feature rather than a defect. And by putting something on a stone, we can play up other features in a tree and really take more advantage of it that way. So really good point, Noah. Shohin. There could be a whole presentation about containers for Shohin, but instead I will give you a few things to think about when you're looking at Shohin displays. And for starters, this is there's a couple famous artifact trees, the Kicho bonsai in Japan. And I forget if this was a prize-winning display. I think it was at GAFU 10 a few years back, which is the top Shohin exhibit in the world. When the judges are asked to score the Shohin display, half of their score is for the display and half of it is for tree quality. And so that tells you how important it is to get the arrangement of trees and the tree quality themselves. And so often the people at the show will know in which cases were the trees the best and in which cases were the displays the best. And sometimes it's the same that have both. If you haven't guessed just by looking, the name of the game in a Shohin display as far as the containers go is contrast. So you want to see as many different, within the same relative size, you want to see as many styles, colors, and shapes as possible. And so here we have a moko, a soft-sided rectangle, a hard-sided rectangle, a kind of pointed oval, and then two basic ovals in a light blue, dark blue, cream painted, and then two unglazed pots. And even the unglazed containers are different colors, red for the juniper, brown for the pine. I'd mentioned tree quality before, or pot quality before in Japanese shows. In GAFU 10, pot quality means essentially how expensive is the pot. And so these are probably antiques and or very expensive containers. But for our purposes tonight, what we want to notice is that as you're evaluating containers for Shohin, try to avoid any repetition whatsoever. And if there is repetition, try to have it not line up and try to give us, again, as much contrast as possible. Anything you all like or don't like about these guys here? There's one comment I see. Oh, great, from Pete about the bottom left tree being off center in a round pot. That's actually not a round pot. It's a funny kind of pointed oval that kind of flares out. So I don't know if there's a specific term for that shape, but it's somewhere between it's actually not far off of a moko. It might be a stylized moko pot, that bottom left one. And so it has really strong movement to the right, which is why the base of the trunk is to the left. That in terms of the position from a display perspective, we want really strong movement from left to right in that bottom left corner. And so that kind of makes sense. Nancy asked the obvious question I was hoping to hear about, which is that why do we have, two oval pots, one right on top of the other? It's probably the best they could do given everything else. If any of you have ever tried to find 6 trees that are all relatively similar in shape, but completely different trunks, branches, leaf type color that all happen to be good at the right time of year, that happen to be arrangeable in a way so the deciduous are on an X across from two broadleaf with conifers on top to the side. And then you come up with containers that work for those styles you have. Boy, good luck. Might it be slightly more optimal if we had something else, say for that Chidamen Kazura, the jasmine in the clear oval? Yeah, it might be nice to have something a little different right there. But they apparently the best they could do was come up with that oval right there. So that's totally fine. Are the two unglazed pots used to harmonize the design? I'd say the convention is the conifers go in unglazed pots, and by convention, it's almost always a pine up top and it's almost always a juniper off to the side. So I'd say those are very conventional choices. Is the juniper the focal point? In general, the focal point is the tree on top gets the most attention. It gets an entire shelf all to itself, and the other trees kind of get to share their spaces with other trees and or other features. But I will say that the largest tree in a 6-point display like this will be the Shohin off to the right, the one in this case, it's the juniper. So in general, the most important tree would be the pine on top. The largest tree would be the one outside the box off to the side. And I think there were a couple other questions in there. Oh, advice about individual stands and the Shohin pots. So everything I said about the pots is true for these stands. And so you'll notice that if you look carefully, every single tree is on a stand that sits on the bigger stand. And you want contrasting styles, shapes, and colors for those stands as well. The primary reason we have those secondary stands is so that we can get the trees at the proper height. We want to get as much height as possible above the jasmine. That's where we want the biggest space in the box to be. We want the tiniest space to be the kind of top left tree inside the box, the chojubai. And so by using a taller stand, that gives us a tiny gap because we want contrast in widths, heights, and even gaps between the tree and the stand. And so it's really, really fun putting together a Shohin display. But if you don't have a whole lot of trees and containers to choose from, it is a maddening exercise.
What is your thought about the accent plant?
I'd say it's an extremely conservative choice. It looks like a mix of Perosia fern and Selaginella, and it's in a painted pot. And what it does is two things. It indicates the season, and I guess that's the main thing, not really the place, but it indicates the season. And so Selaginella will be brown through winter. And so it gives us a nice idea about that. It's a little bigger than I would expect, but maybe they just wanted to show off that really fancy pot, which is kind of a designer thing, which if you look closely has an incredibly detailed picture painted in that tiny blue and white panel on the front of that pot. So that's probably a fairly extraordinary container. But again, knowing that the owner of this has two Kicho bonsai in the same display, this is a very, very high level Shohin display. But I will say, yes, it's busy, but kind of by convention, it adds a different form of contrast. All right. You will notice that there is a lot of contrast we can see in the types of trunks. And so the reason I chose these three trees, all from US national shows, it looks like, we have a black pine, a western juniper, and the spruce, the bird's nest spruce, I think. Beautiful trees. And when we see trees that have more details in the trunk, that's when we're more likely to see more details on the pots. So on the left, we call that kind of a pot with a window or a panel pot. And this is actually a very large trunk on this black pine. And it has some interesting deadwood, a little bit of kind of an uro or kind of the hole or gap in the middle of the thing, and some really great bark, funky, gnarly roots. And so having a big flat panel might look kind of boring against that. And so the owner opted for this really nice handmade pot that has that window on it. The center pot has the kind of, I forget if that's an antique container or not, but it has that painting on it as if it were an old antique. It probably is, knowing the owner. It's a beautiful, beautiful tree. And it has the same thing, a big flat empty pot would look kind of boring against the the tree. To repeat the species again, black pine on the left. I believe that's a Western juniper in the middle. And I think it's a bird's nest spruce over on, oh, no, not bird's nest. I remember the owner of the tree. I'm trying to remember. There's a wonderful article about that tree actually in International Bonsai Magazine a few years back. It was at the national show. Was it 4 or 5 years ago, something like that? But I believe it is a spruce over on the right. I forget which one. I think it was actually growing in a hedge tree, and they dug the thing up, made a bonsai out of it, and voila, 10 years later, it looked absolutely amazing. And so the pot on the right is really interesting because it's kind of a rectangle, but with very, very softened corners with the kind of round, almost column-like approach that really soften it. And yet a panel, which kind of makes even more detail or more formal in the middle. And a question from Nancy, does the shape of the pot feet relate at all to the trunk, or is it more about pot shape? You see different things with pot feet. I will say that we've talked about levels of formality for containers. In general, square pots are the most formal, then probably rectangles, then the ovals, then the rounds. There's kind of a ranking, you could say. And for whatever reason, cloud feet, which are the kind of soft, curly, very informal to our eyes looking feet, are in Japan the most formal. And so we will often see cloud feet on large, heavy trees like the spruce on the right. They're common on a lot of black pine pots. In general, the way I think of the feet is we're just trying to find something that either plays up a feature in the tree. Maybe there's some interesting movement, and getting a little bit of extra curves in the feet can give it a little extra feeling. Maybe if the tree reaches and we want to ground it more, we're going to go for a more flat-footed option with maybe larger, less detailed or less fissured feet. Now, it looks like Pete asked a really obvious question again about that I like on the, does the painted design on the pot compete in any way with the detail on the trunk? And to my eye, it actually does catch my attention a little bit. I know why that makes a kind of conventional choice for that, but I think here's where we're getting deep into what does the owner feel is the best option. If I thought that the shape and size of the pot was perfect for the tree, and I had to put up with the say it was a less attractive painting on it, I might put up with it because everything else is right. But I think it's totally personal choice if you think it enhances the composition, or if it kind of detracts from it. My guess is it's because it's indicating that it's an old pot and a high quality pot, and they thought the tree's so strong that the pot won't take away from it. Rather, when you're there looking at it in person, it's a good sized tree. This is a large tree, not quite 3 feet tall, but not far from it. And you really do notice the tree a lot more than the pot.
When I'm looking at these pictures, I don't know the sizes of the trees, but how would the pot on the tree in the right do for the tree in the middle if it was the appropriate size?
Oh, so it's almost really, really good for it. But I'm going to say that pots that kind of bulge out at the sides or have soft rounded features like that does, it makes you expect a much bigger trunk. And so I'd say I would want a less kind of bulbous feeling version of the pot on the right for the tree in the middle. The reason it works so well for that tree on the right, really, really well, is because those rounded features kind of signify giant trunk. And there'll be some other pictures that kind of exemplify that later on. That's another convention, but that's, I think, where kind of artistic, just Western principles kind of line up with what we see in pot tree combos. Now, the pot for the middle tree could be a tiny bit on the big side. I'm trying to remember in person what it looked like. It's always harder to gauge in the photos. Yeah, there might be another shape that might be slightly more flattering to it. But when you get into the really fine details of what kind of pot shape is the best, I would actually typically start asking questions about, is there a modification to the foliage I'd want to make the styling a little more effective before I would go back and make the pot more effective? Once I know what the final changes are to the foliage, then I would choose my pot. And so all of these have been developed over, for American bonsai, relatively kind of shorter periods of time. And over time, as we see more and more signs of patent development that we will see maybe different features reflected in the containers. Actually, I should say that the juniper in the middle has pretty outstanding foliage for an American collected juniper. You don't often see such good branch density on them. Okay, question
Nancy asked
from...
a good question, yeah.
Yeah. What amount of patina or damage to a pot is acceptable for shows? For example, would natural oil remove patina of old pots, and would a chip on a foot make it not good to use for shows? Two great questions. The older the pot, the more forgiving we are of imperfections. That said, we don't want imperfections to be distracting. If there's a chipped foot, put it in the back. If all 4 feet are chipped, find the smallest chip and put that one in the front. When it comes to patina, you almost can't have enough until it turns totally black and you can't even tell what color the pot originally was. And even then, there are some cases where it can look kind of cool. Now, the white watermarks on containers do not count as patina, and that always looks awful. And so I would try to oil it to downplay it. And sometimes I will try to scrape it off. Now, what really stinks is when you have to lose actual patina to get rid of those white watermarks. And that's a really tough choice when you have those kind of considerations to make. Natural oils typically help patina build up and bring out beautiful richness in the clays when you have a well patinaed container. So I actually recommend using natural oils whenever showing trees. There's a lot of oils that can work. I know in Japan, they often use baby oil, but traditionally, enoki oil would be a common one. Camellia oil is another common one. Walnut oil is a fantastic oil because it's really light in color. And so that can be a great oil for bonsai pots. I've used all of those.
Nancy has a question about how much should we consider repetition of shapes in the trunk and pot and feet shape versus contrasting shapes?
And so I only kind of spoke to that one. I think that that's going to be the first time I lean on the case by case thing. When do I want the contrast and when do I want to call attention to something? Usually we don't have the exact same pot with 2 different sets of feet. And so we're actually considering the feet along with every other characteristic of that container all together. And so we're looking at the lip, the shape, the size, the silhouette, the profile, the patina, all of that. And so the feet are just one of those considerations. In general, I don't think of feet as contrast. I think of more, in general, I don't consider the feet until they're distracting. I guess that's kind of how I think of it. Occasionally they can add, occasionally they can distract, but for the most part, if the pot was really well designed, it's going to be a pretty good fit. So you're kind of getting the feet along with everything else. I don't know if that helps or not, Nancy. Feel free to ask follow-ups. We got a lot more pots to look at tonight, but that I think it starts to get at it. And Ignacio, I'm so sorry to say there is no preferred method of removing watermarks. The preferred method is not to get them and water your trees with water that's been reverse osmosis treated, and you just never build them up. But people have used chemical treatments. I have no idea since I haven't gone that route. I have tried using rust erasers like the Cremate and just try to physically scrape it off. If there's not much patina, I just go for it and just kind of try to scrape it away as best I can without scratching the clay. And something like those rust erasers is the best that I know of. But people who live in places like Southern California know a lot, or just have really hard water, know a lot more about different tricks of the trade. And I'll defer to their suggestions about what might work well for that. It's hard to buy a pot without seeing it next to the tree. Will high-end antique pot dealers usually allow them to be returned? That's a great question for whoever buying the pot from. I will say that we have some extremely reputable pot vendors in this country, and they will take care of you. And if you have, if it's an expensive pot, just send them a note. They'll probably be happy to answer questions. You don't want to be surprised if you're spending a lot of money on a container. And yeah, it is really hard. Now, that said, not a lot of people will want to take returns on high-end antiques because it's so expensive to pack them up and ship them, and the chance for damage is going to be rough. when you're buying a high-end tree or high-end container, hopefully you'll be able to use it for more than one tree and be able to put it to work, if not for that one tree. So I would definitely, I don't know that I would have an expectation about being able to return a high-end pot, but I would definitely check with who you buy it from. If it's local, someone you know, they might be more likely to say yes. If it's through the mail and you don't know them, I'd assume less likely, but definitely ask them. We're really lucky. We have some amazing vendors for pots around. And so I'd say a big chunk of pots are just available in random gardens and nurseries. And so never hesitate to ask when you visit places if there's containers there. And online, you can find just tons and tons of stuff these days, which is great. Now, I chose these specifically because it just gets right at what we've been talking around a lot, where we have really striking containers that very explicitly pick up their design cues from the trees. It's possibly a Chinese antique pot on the left, beautiful, beautiful pot for the juniper on the left. The pot in the middle is a Tom Benda with that white pine. And that's a case where the geometric form really picks up on the details of the exposed roots in that case. And I forget who made the container on the right, but wow, did they try to reproduce almost precisely the characteristics you see in the trunk. And here, to head off any questions, I'm going to say it's completely eye of beholder in whether it's too much similarity, not enough, or just the right amount. And I've talked to the owners of a couple of these trees, and they thought they were exactly the right amount of similarity there. But I think it's a really fun discussion to have. And I kind of like it when we can push things in kind of new or novel directions, not only just to take advantage of the inherent artistic characteristics of the containers. I mean, Tom Benda's work is absolutely fantastic. He's a European potter, by the way, but his work isn't, there's not a ton of it around there, but it's not impossible to find. So just look for Tom Benda. And so it's really up to us to see how we think it pairs. Like, any of you think it's too much, or do you think that these are all really well paired to the trees? I'll be curious. Seems impossible if the tree on the right doesn't tip over. That's something to consider. It actually, based on the photo, it almost looks like it's floating. I see 2 feet touching over on the left, and I don't even see a foot on the right side of the pot. I very much doubt it was actually balanced when I saw it, but that's something to consider. Do you want it to feel precarious or not? Georgianne, happy to hear that you think all three look good. I thought they were pretty fun. Here's one criteria I might apply to whether or not something's enough or too much. And that is, when the trunk has more to offer, I'm less likely to want to play up that feature with a container. When a trunk has less to offer, I'm more willing to look for a pot that kind of duplicates that effort. For interesting, the whole point of that tree on the right is that it has this crazy funky design, but it's a very slender trunk. And so, the character, it's really about the movement and the journey of that. And so, because it's a more playful design, I think it's fairly appropriate to play with that. And it might actually look kind of boring if you put it in just a round brown pot with no details. I think because Benda's work is so beautiful for that white pine in the middle, I just like seeing his stuff used. And so I think it's fun, and I love just seeing how people think of it. The fact that the tree morphs from a very natural trunk at the very tip top of the composition, dividing into roots, which are mostly linear, but nothing on it is straight. And then as they divide and kind of devolve, we end up in more and more geometric shapes as it gets closer to the ground, which is kind of a big artistic statement. And I don't want to kind of get too deep into that, but it tells a different kind of story. It's like where everything's getting smaller and smaller and more informal, but then all of a sudden it ends up super crisp and formal. And it's like, oh, interesting. Quite a contrast to the top. It is a little strong for the tree. That's kind of the one thing. I don't know if there's a way to do that better, but it's a very strong feeling pot, hard, sharp edges. are so in contrast to the very gentle foliage of white pines. I see the, oh yeah, reflecting the pine cone, but not super obvious. That's a good point about the benda. Um, Mark found it too repetitious on the right. Mark, I'll just ask you sometime what you think the right pot would be for that. And again, when the trunk is as informal as the one on the right, I don't know what in the world I'd choose, because I don't know that I even have a good option for it in my garden. I would actually take a page out of Noah's earlier comment and say that might be a really good match for a stone, and have that crazy trunk coming out of a stone. The tree on the right look better on a wider stand. Yeah, we're just kind of pushing the right. That's about as small as I'd want to go. A slightly bigger stand could give a little more balance, but if we went too wide, I'd want to make sure that the legs were really, really slender, because wider would, because if you get heavier legs or a heavier stand, it starts to make the trunk look skinnier. And I want to make the trunk look big, not skinny in that case. Less texture on the pot. Yeah, if there was kind of a moon pot that was a little less textured, that might suggest the curves we're going to see in the trunk without just straight up reproducing them. Yeah, call up Benda for the tree on the right. Yeah, that'd be fun. All right, let's see what we have next. It's about time to put you all to the test. All right, so what do we do when we have multiple trunks? Well, the conventions are pretty clear on that. They tend to go in really shallow containers, either ovals or rectangles. And this is interesting in that we have an unglazed container for a deciduous tree on the left and a glazed container for the shojubai on the right. I think that makes all kinds of sense for the tree on the right. I think if we had a cream color pot, it would kind of reproduce too much the color of the trunks. And so I like that on the left we have a different color. Glazed pot could look really, really good for the tree on the left. The one thing I like about the brown, at least in the photo, is that it kind of picks up on the darkness of the branches, but I just don't remember from when I saw the tree if it's an artifact of the photo, the shadows on the branches, or if they really were that dark. But in general, multiple trunks or clump style, it's especially multiple trunks, forest styles, you're really going to see shallow containers, and not a lot of strong conventions about whether to go rectangle or oval. But I will say it's totally okay to go much, much wider than just standard. These are both kind of standard shapes, but you can use pretty wide containers for forests because you're suggesting a landscape. And so feel free to give us a landscape. Now, what if you've got a tree planted on a rock or multiple trees planted on a rock? These are both examples from the US National Show. They tend to go in more shallow containers, but there's an interesting distinction to make between these two right here. For the tree on the left, or composition on the left, when kind of the focal point is the stone and you have trees hanging from a stone, almost exclusively, those are going to go into really shallow pots, and it's almost more of a penjing starting point for how to appreciate the design. When you have a tree styled with one major trunk like a normal bonsai, whether you got to figure the tree that Juniper's growing on, if that were deadwood or just a really big trunk, we would expect a deeper pot. And so you get deeper containers when it's styled like one big tree in the container. And the interesting thing for me about the tree on the right is it's in a glazed container. You almost never see junipers in glazed containers, but this pot was so old and it's such a dark, dull glaze. I actually thought it made kind of a cool option for the tree. Oh, now Bruce, for the novice, how do we select a pot if no one is with us to advise? There's two approaches to it. A, you just take the know-nothing approach and you pick what you like, and then you learn over time if you like what you came up with. Or option number two is teach yourself what patterns you like best and which patterns you like least. And the best way of doing that is by studying show books. And so if you like the Japanese aesthetic, get a bunch of Koka-fu books, Taikon 10 books, Gafu 10 books. And the more you expose yourself to those conventions, it'll become secondhand what shapes and colors look good. If you want to take European or American models, we happen to have some fantastic shows in the North America. The US National Show has produced 8 amazing books from their show. And in Europe, you can see a whole bunch of different options, but the 2 most famous ones were from the Nollander's Trophy, now known simply as the Trophy, or the Ginkgo Awards before that. And so you'll see a lot of fun novel pots in the European show specifically, because somehow there are more contemporary potters working in more novel directions in Europe than seemingly anywhere else within the bonsai community. And they've been doing it for a very long time. So they have a rich history of really good stuff. The only other thing I can say, Bruce, is that there probably are a lot of online groups that would be happy to give you advice. I cannot tell you what the quality of that advice would be. And so plenty of grains of salt to go along with that. For the tree on the left, would a wider pot be better? In my mind, yeah, I'd want a little wider pot. It's a little bit tippy for me. It does look precarious. Those stones are typically very heavy, and I don't worry about it falling over, but it's also a little cutesy to have a big lip and a pronounced bead and then the large feet on the container. I would like a little quieter container and a little wider container for that one. Fun tree, though. All right. And so kind of the last technical thing we'll talk about is size. We touched on this earlier with the question about what's good for the tree's health. You really can keep things alive in really surprisingly small containers. But to get back to David's question about the kind of least overused pots, I have a good answer for that. Probably the least well-utilized containers, with no close second, are people develop bonsai at early stages of development in show pots, and that's just silly. It looks really good in our gardens, but I'd say that is a big trend that on the whole has, I will say, a giant effect on tree quality nationally. There are so many bonsai that would be healthier, grow faster, and develop more successfully if people either put them in training pots or simply larger containers. It's super fun to make our gardens look good by buying a better container. And it makes us feel like we have progress when our trees graduate into a bonsai container. But the smaller the container we put a tree into, what we're really saying is that we want the tree to develop as little as possible at this point. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Some species grow fantastic in bonsai pots, and so feel free to disregard that. But in general, I'd say that's actually a really, really big trend. A lot of people are using show pots, and not only show pots, but like handmade containers for rough development work. And oftentimes it's setting the trees back. So I often match, I do the same mistake because I think bonsai pots are pretty, but more and more, what I really aim for is I try to find a container where I'm matching the stage of development to the kind of level of refinement to the container. That's terracotta or wood box. Could be plastic for much younger field-grown stuff. And then I'll put it in a really rough, oversized training pot. And then I put it in kind of a decent pot near the end. And then literally for show, because I have a few Chinese antiques, I'll often drop trees into really nice quality containers just for the exhibit. And then I'll swap the container again after the show. They do that in Japan all the time. And so that's 2 or 3 cents about container size. All right, so here's your warm-up for the quiz. Feel free to think to yourself or put a number in the chat box of if you like pot number 1, pot number 2, or pot number 3 for this very unusually styled juniper.
Two's winning. Got
Yeah,
it.
you don't all have to say 2. Good. We have 1, 1, 1, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And so, okay, 3 but rougher. What I should have asked is why number 2 looks good. Why the hexagon for that? Now we've got some 3s coming in, another 1. I'm going to say that all of these are a little problematic. Let's look at what the owner of this pot chose. I know I kind of cheated. I went with a completely different pot. It's very similar to the pot that the spruce was in. And so it's somewhere, it's kind of a really stylized mocha with very round features that very explicitly kind of play up the kind of large sinews in the pot. And so that's kind of what they came up with, but it's not crazy to go with those other options. So among those other pots, numbers 1 and 2, particularly number 1, and yeah, number 1 and 2 both, I would expect kind of a semi-cascade feel with a little more upright feeling, which is kind of what this tree has. But I think it's a little bit tall for just plain a square or hexagon. But I'd say they're pretty darn close. So this tree, unlike what I'd expect in a round pot, it has a very strong opinion about where the front is because it has so much movement to one side. And when it has a strong indication of movement, I'd want to get it out of a square or a rectangle. I'm sorry, square, round, or hex, and I'd want to get it in something that's wider than it is, the same front to back as it is side to side. And so I think that you all had reason to hesitate with any of these. And so I think that was pretty smart. And then you had some more specific comments on top of that. So the windows mimic the flashes of the deadwood and live vein. That's true. Playing up contrast in the pot's a good way to call attention to it in the show. A technical question, is it too much stress to get trees in and out of pots just for show? No, if there's a solid root base and you get it in and out, it is a little bit stressful, but in general, you're doing this in the dormant season, and so it can be done without a problem. And yes, David, pot number 4, which wasn't shown there. I think that's actually a pretty good match in that it is oval, but it's getting a lot. It's of all the different ovals, it's getting the closest to a semi-cascade shape and the closest to a round shape of all the ovals. And so it's a really good example of when you've got a tree that's kind of in between, it really helps to have different kinds of trees. So that's just your warm up. Now it's time for a quiz. I've started up a quiz. Feel free to move that window around if it's blocking things. You're looking at a Japanese maple in 6 different containers. And all you have to do is vote for whichever one feels the most effective. Go ahead and do that right now. They're all shallow ovals. It's mostly a matter of color and character. So I'll give you a few moments to do that. When we have a bunch of votes in, we will see what you all picked. This is a tree I've had in my collection for a few years now, and I've already had it in a couple different containers, probably repotted again this year. Votes are slowing down, so I'm going to call it right there. And here you all have the results. So we have an absolute perfect tie between 1 and 2, and then 5 being the least interesting. The kind of votes go down from there. Now, before we show kind of what the tree ended up in, I'd be curious, could a few of you say a word or two about what you did or did not like about any of these options? The baby blue is popular, and I believe that pot on the top left is a Sarah Rayner container, and a lot of people can spot Sarah's work a mile away, and that could be one reason why they like it.
If you can't see your picture, you can move the window around.
Yeah, either or hit it to full screen. Full screen, it should automatically kind of size. Oh, we have a comment about the texture on the first pot and the glaze picking up some colors. Yeah, I'd say the texture and glaze is really unique on that pot number 1. You just do not see that color in Japan almost at all. And so I think it's kind of what we'd expect for American bonsai and is a good choice for the tree. Another like for 1 and 5. Number 5, it looks like an upside down hat. I don't like the lips. I would say that the lips are a bit much for this tree. The lips on 2 and 3 are a little more gentle, but the lip on 5 is pretty strong. And where I just kind of closing my eyes, in general, you don't see strong lips on trees in this style in Japan. So I would expect a little less of that. Now, we'll kind of clear that out and get to the next slide. And I went with the deeper pot. And so again, to give you a less satisfying answer, possibly, I wanted the tree to grow more. And so I put it in the largest pot of all of those. And what's funny is I've repotted it into another pot the same size. I'm going to try to take my own advice. These branches have years and years and years to go before they look anywhere near show ready. I have to rebuild the whole top of the tree, for instance. And so I'm actually going to take it out of a pot this size and put it in a lot bigger pot so that it'll grow faster and develop. Now, it doesn't need to be a deep pot unless there's a health problem. I can keep it in a shallow pot, maybe another inch deeper, but it can be significantly wider, and that will help continue to develop the root flare at the lower end of the trunk.
So maybe your quiz needs to be worded as which pot would be appropriate for show versus which pot would be appropriate for growth.
Well, so what's nice is I'd say every one of these would have been fine for show. I might like 5 a little less because of the lip, but I thought the color was the best. I really like the color of 5 because I think dark blues look great with the maples. But I don't like the lip as much on 5. For number 4, I don't like the curved or convex sides. That would suggest a much larger trunk. Curved sides often just mean bigger trunk. And so the straight-sided ovals of 1 and 6, I think, are a really good appropriate shape. I think 2 and 3 are a good alternative to that straight side, but I would probably actually, they both look a little small to me, a little dinky. And I think the curved lips make that more the case. I think if this tree was fuller, broader, wider, and more branch density, a slightly bigger version of 2 or 3 would look absolutely fantastic. But color-wise, they're pretty much all appropriate. Would this tree ever go into a wood box? Yeah, if I wanted strong growth on it, a wood box would be perfect. Or if I simply don't own a box or a pot the shape I want, a wood box would be a fantastic option for developing it. I'm actually strongly considering putting this in a wood box because I really don't know that I can show the tree for the next 5 to 10 years until I get better branching on it, and a wood box will help me get there faster. Right. Time for the next quiz. So this tree is a kind of medium-sized Yopon Holly. Some of you saw it at the Pacific Bonsai Expo. It is a broadleaf evergreen species. It's native to Texas, one of my very favorite species for bonsai. And I have actually shown this tree in both glazed and unglazed containers. I'll be curious to see which containers you choose for a show, we'll say. And if you have comments about likes or dislikes, feel free after you vote to get some likes and dislikes in there. I believe the tree's 12 inches tall, if I recall. If you feel you love the style of the tree, but the size is wrong, let us know that too. And so I will just say, yes, bigger pots would be better for growing it out. We'll get that out of the way, and we'll really just focus on which pots you like and in which sizes. Okay, I'll end the poll, share the results with you all, and there's the winners. Pot 3 is an old Japanese container. Pot 1, I believe, is, I forget the maker, but modern tokoname pot. Number 2, Shuho, I believe. Number 4, Gyozan. Number 5, just some Japanese pot. Number 6, I think, is a production Gyozan pot. So by far, the most popular choices were pot number 3 and pot number 5. So I grew this tree and showed it many times in pot number 5. This was in number 5 for many, many years. So I think that actually is kind of a fun choice for it. It breaks my rule of using a round-ish pot. This is an 8-sided pot. And I just finished saying that I would not choose an 8-sided pot for something that has such strong left to right or kind of sensibility. The reason I put it in 5, I didn't have a pot. The roots are huge from front to back. And I actually didn't own a container for 10 years that was a rectangle that had enough space from the front to the back that I could even fit the tree in. In fact, you'll notice that pot number 3, almost the entire root ball is floating above the pot because I can't even fit the root ball inside that container. And I would have had to cut off to almost all the roots back to solid wood before I get it in there. But style-wise, I'd say because number 3 did so well, if I could have a slightly smaller version of number 3, not a bad container for the tree. A little bit smaller would be better. I would also say I'd want the styling to be better. It looks a little different now. And it's actually, that tree has another 5 or 10 years to go before it has the silhouette I want it to have. This is kind of middle stages of development. It just looks like a gumdrop kind of. So I actually think almost every one of these containers is appropriate. Probably the least appropriate would be number 6, and it got the fewest amount of votes. But if we could shrink it down, it would be a better option. But I would need to make it a little shallower and smaller to make that one feel better. Pot 1, I think, actually looked really good. I grew it in there for a while, but I'd want it to be a little smaller. Pot 2 is a little bit pretty for it. But I will say female Yopon Hollies have fantastic red berries on it, and red berries look great with the deep blue like that. So 2 is kind of a fun option. And 4 just had kind of a heavy feeling. Notice how small it makes the trunk. When you have rounded edges and a bead on it, I expect a really large trunk. And part of it's that the roots go down so deep, but it's somehow, despite the size of that trunk, pot number 4 makes it seem like it's just swimming in that container. So I think your scores did really well in terms of lining up characteristics with the trees. Let's see. Someone chose 5 because of how the root and trunk set so nicely in it. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I don't know if that's John or Marcia, but yes, that is exactly right. The reverse angle of number 3 counters the angle of the tree, and it does. You have they can form a clamshell if it's not done well, and that's why were that tree to fit in the pot better and the pot be a better size for the tree, that's what I would want to look at before I know if that's my final choice for whether or not that'd be a good one. What's the style of pot 4? I would just say that's kind of a rounded corner, or not cut corner, but it's like the corners are turned inward. So inward turned corner rectangle, or I forget what they call that in Japanese, but it's more like when the corners, instead of pointing out, are kind of tucked in. But a soft corner or an inverse corner rectangle on that number 4. Really pretty style. I think they're great. I've used them a lot. All right. Let's do, I believe we have, so in this case, I chose one that wasn't on the list. So you don't need to worry about what I chose because I have used almost every one of those pots over the years. I believe this is the pot I used when I showed it this last fall because it was one of the only ones that was the right size. And the other reason I went with the white pot is, and this is kind of a bonus, when you think about display, if this is a medium-sized tree, I'm going to show it with a second tree. If the second tree is a conifer, the conifer is going to be in an unglazed pot. So I wanted to go out of my way to use a glazed pot, and a dark blue glaze wouldn't look as good paired with the unglazed pot that was in the juniper that I showed with this tree. So yet another piece of another criteria you can use when selecting a container for the tree. Okay, and it looks like we have one more quiz. We'll go through this one a little faster. This is a dwarf wisteria shown here without the foliage. And so which of these would you prefer to show this tree in just as it is right now? I think we have a Yamaki top left, Eco top middle, Yamaki top right, Minerai, bottom left, Sarah Rayner, middle bottom, and a Vicky Chamberlain, bottom right. So 3 Americans on the bottom shelf, 3 Japanese on the top shelf. Oh, this is going to be fun. A few more votes coming in. And it's not changing the results at all. I can tell the people on this presentation are not strangers to the internet. Here are your choices. I'll be curious why the Roy Minerai worked for so many of you. Yeah, you don't have to worry about flowers. That's true. This one has never bloomed. It's known as a blind wisteria, and it is not, it's a cutting. I grew this from cutting for about 25 years. The parent flowers a little bit every year, but it didn't flower the first 30, 40 years of its life. And I've never seen it flower. But the tree from which it was cut does bloom a little these days every year. So people like the colors and the proportion. I'll be curious what other things you do or don't like about some of these containers.
To me, pot number 4 seems too wide. A little.
It's a little wide for me too. And so I'd say this is, I probably wouldn't use it just because of the width. And in terms, yeah, I'll repeat the artist in just a sec. And the, it might be a little flashy for me. I like the shallowness, but it was a little much. And part of it might come down to how I'm displaying it. But the movement in the glaze does go well with the branching. That's kind of a nice point, Emily. And same thing with pot number 5. Let's see, top left and top right are, oh, actually, top left is probably Yamaki. Number 2 is probably Iko. Number 3 is probably Yamafusa. Looks like Yamafusa. Bottom left is Roy Minerai out of South Carolina. Number 5 is Sarah Rayner. And number 6 is Vicky Chamberlain out of Ashland, Oregon. Like number 6 because it shows off the branches. Yeah, I like number 6 too. So what was fun about this is that you all really rallied around that. And my guess is that part of it was the shallowness. This was the most shallow pot of all of them. And we like deciduous trees in shallow pots. But I think that it was also the colors. Let's see. What I ended up going with was this guy. Now, again, that's a bad example, so I might just undo that because I'll say that, again, was to grow it. What I actually showed this pot in, I think, was number 6, and so that's the one that I'd used before. I used number 1 because I want this to be a long-term growing project, and I want to make it much bigger over time, so I went with the biggest pot, but for show, I chose number 6 in this case. I don't think it's the optimal pot, but 2 and 3 felt heavy and deep for me. I was really close to going with number 5 because I thought it's just kind of a novel color you don't see in Japan, but it was a little bit heavy. And then number 4 was just too wide. It was also deep front to back and just didn't work as well in person. So I liked going more neutral with kind of 1 or 6 then for the show. And I'll be curious, feel free to note, like, is this kind of exercise fun or helpful as you're going through? So feel free to let us know now or let Dodie know after the fact. We're both curious about that. Now, here's our second form of quiz. We're going to look at what kind of container goes for a tree. This is the problem that you all have when you look in your backyard and you see that terracotta pot that Jonas recommended you grow that tree in, and now it's ready for show. And so you've got to start figuring out what to get for it. So feel free to make a note in the comment if you have an idea. What would you put this juniper in? And then we'll get to the formal quiz. This is our warm-up quiz for coming up with a container. Very different kind of exercise. Unglazed Moko we have. Semi-cascade. I think one reason this is a hard tree to find a style for is because it's not just a simple style. It's kind of like that other one. I'm purposefully choosing some real, symmetric, deep, reddish, unglazed. But you all are having either you've seen this before or you have just really, really good instincts. Whoever just said symmetric, deep, reddish glazed, you get a gold star for that. And a number of you are onto that. Valerie, semi-cascade, yes. The unglazed comments, yes. Square pot tall, yes. But it has the cut corners in this case. And so this is an unusual pot, and it's kind of an unusual style. It's a little more upright than your average semi-cascade. So they went with a semi-cascade pot that has some really interesting details, prominent cut corners, and a prominent bas relief design on the front panel, which is kind of cool. So we'll make the quizzes a little easier than this, but the reddish brown is a very traditional companion with junipers because it really brings out the ruddiness of the bark. When you peel away the aged bark, can really reveal that. All right, so
made this pot, do you know?
That's an old antique. So that's probably, I don't know if it's Chinese or Japanese, but that is an old pot. All right, now here we have a Zelkova serrata. Feel free to pick a shape for it. We will cut the poll there, share the results, and you all picked. Probably no big surprise on that. Let's see what the owner of this pot went, or the owner of the tree went with. I'd say oval would be totally appropriate for this. Here's when you are more likely to see a square, or I should say a rectangle with a deciduous form like this. When the tree is super old, super dense, and has a good trunk and prominent roots, kind of every characteristic that this tree has, you're as likely to see it in a rectangle as you are in an oval. Like this can be a very appropriate form. There you go. It's oval, but dimpled edge square. So whoever, MJ, pat yourself on the back. That was a very good comment you made, because that's exactly what we ended up with here. One thing that stands out to a lot of people is not everyone likes kind of the baby blue that's so common in Japanese containers. And I'd say it's something to get used to. It's so not anything related to any of the colors you see in the tree. It kind of just provides a nice break or a grounding between a wood stand, a trunk, which is made of wood, of course, covered in bark, and it's almost a more abstract color. It also really pops with the green. And so the baby blue really sets off the moss, which provides the then stronger base for the tree. And it always looks good when trees grow in moss. So I think you did a great job by selecting oval for that. But I want you, the reason I included this one is I wanted you to be open to rectangles when it has a nice feature. And I will also note, not only does it have cut corners, but notice that the feet are glazed and there's a little bit of a roundness. There's no lip to it, and it's almost round on top rather than squared off. So it actually has very, very soft features for a rectangle. And I think that kind of thing counts. All right, let's see what's next. Oh, another weird one. I did want to give you a few interesting ones. All right, and here are your choices. This is a fairly well-known tree in Europe. I saw this at the trophy a few years back in Belgium, Genk, Belgium. The largest bonsai show in Europe, and by far the biggest vendor area. They have over 100 vendors at this show. It's really spectacular if you can make it. It's held every year in January in Genk, Belgium. All right, this one we're going in a few different directions, which will be kind of fun compared with the last one. All right, let's see what you all came up with. And let's see how it compares with what the owner came up with. So this is somewhere between an oval and a moko. And so I'd say those of you that, and it's a little bit extra round for rectangles. So I'd say this would be more in the kind of moko territory here, or more of a stylized oval. But when you have the pinches at that about, quarter of the way in on the sides, it's a little more of a moko. What do you think of the selection? Like, do you like this or do you not like it for this tree?
I like
Because
it.
you all came up with very different. We had some options for round. I'd say more movement would have made more sense for round or square, but it's fairly upright. So I wouldn't have gone with round or square because those indicate cascades. 6 or 8 sided, almost close, but it's a little too directional for me to go 6 or 8 sided. So I would want to be in the kind of rectangle, oval, or moko territory for this one. You should add more angles like the feet. Yeah, they went with almost too soft features, and I'd almost expect a little larger trunk, but for some reason, overall, I think it works well. And I think it's because it plays up the large movement in the trunk, which is a little softer, and the larger movements of the foliage up on top. It is a very subdued container, too round. And so what I notice is with this tree specifically, a lot of things can be played up or played down. Straighter lines, harder edges, sharper features are going to play up the deadwood. Rounder features are going to play up the larger movements of the trunk and the foliage. One thing I wish is just that the tree had a few more years in development. We can kind of see right through the foliage right now. In other words, the pads look very young. It looks like the bark was just pulled off, the deadwood was just carved, and the foliage was just wired. And again, this is one of a really good famous tree in Europe, but the whole thing has a young feeling to it, and the pot has no visible patina. And so I think the opportunities for improvement would be more time and training on the tree. And I think I would agree with most of the comments there that a little more character of the pot, I think you could kind of play up some features a little bit more. Georgia Ann likes the color of the pot. Some people might comment that a more striking color might bring out the lifeline a little more. All right, I think we got one more of these. And I forget if this one is I think it's a cryptomeria. Looks a little compact for femina or needle juniper. Let's give you the poll. Here you go. This is a great example of where any one of these trees on their own would be, to put it kindly, a very modest bonsai. But when you have a whole bunch of modest trees and you stick them together, they can become extraordinary. And this is just so weird for so many reasons. I really enjoy it. I do love cryptomeria. That's part of it. But usually you want the same kind of character in the trunk, but some of these have very straight trunks. Some of these have a lot of movement in the trunk. Some have tons of heavy branches that are as big as a trunk. Some have very few branches that are very slender. But what's great is the whole thing is kind of inconsistently done, which gives you a whole lot of fun characteristics to play up. So what are you all going to be shopping for this tree? Apparently, it's going to be an oval. Let's see if the owner agrees with you. If it's not an oval, it's going to be a rectangle. Survey says giant rectangle. So oval, 100% appropriate for this. But this is why I kind of mentioned that oversized pots can be good. And this is actually fairly shallow front to back. It's a very, actually might even be sinuous root style. I can't tell. Looks like it might be. But it's not very deep front to back, but very, very wide. And you're more likely to find rectangles in that shape than ovals. But while it might be technically upside down moonstone, yeah, I'd like to see that too. Slab actually would have been a great option. Jen, thanks for that. You're definitely right. But when you're creating a landscape, you can use a much bigger kind of canvas for your trees. And I think this is a really good example of that. Yeah, the ferns are a great complement. Um, it's kind of highlighting that this is a little copse or isolated stand of trees, and that we have different kind of flora living underneath those trees in the shade, including that one tree that totally died, it looks like. I wonder if that actually died or if they just added that in. You never really know. But I'd say your instincts are all really good on these. I don't see a lot of this kind of design in the US. I think we can do more. I'm always on the lookout for material to put together for old forests. So if you are ever shopping and you see a lot of old trees that are funky, buy the whole batch and just start a long-term forest project. If you don't want to buy old trees, start a bunch of cuttings or little things. And then one day, maybe you'll wake up 30 years will have passed and it'll look just like this. I mean, it happened to this person, whoever owned this one. And so the reason I'm giving you some of these exercises is these are actually all games that you can play at home. You can open up your favorite show book or print out trees you see online, trace the trunk and the silhouette, and just start drawing in different pots and see what pots make sense. This is the opposite game. We're looking at a pot, guess of what kind of tree would fit into that. So like, feel free if you want to share in the comments or in the chat, what kind of a tree you'd expect for this pot, this kind of funny, shallowish square pot with cloud feet and giant curves on it. There's no answers to these. These are just more kind of fun. Yeah, I think semi-cascade would be perfectly reasonable. Juniper specifically would be good. If this were semi-cascade juniper, I'd want it to have a big trunk, some prominent lifeline. And here's what else comes to mind. Big curves in the pot make me want lots of interesting movement. The kind of convex portion at the bottom of the pot and the cloud feet make me want to have a larger trunk that has that kind of round movement. And so I like buying pots. Yeah, that's right. Fat trunk, semi-cascade. The pine, where to pine, I would want more movement. And that's why I don't know if a pine would be right for that. But if you could have the pine with the right movement, like just a massive, fun, undulating serpentine trunk, I think that would look super cool. All right, let's look at some other ones. Oh, this is one of my favorite shapes. Somewhere between an oval version of a lotus pot, or not quite moko, but it's a classic shape for Chinese antique pots. It's kind of a modified mirror pot, the Kagami shape. Those are often the ones with the scalloped edges, but it's kind of an oval version of that Kagami shape. Someone would like to see a ginkgo in this. Man, I'd like to see anything in this. Clump style clump style could work for this, actually. That would be good. Wide formal broadleaf. Oh, that'd be interesting. If it had the right movement in it, I actually could see a broadleaf in this. I think that'd be really interesting. The features in the pot that I see that would make us choose one tree over another are that for being a relatively shallow pot, it has convex sides and a fairly prominent lip, as well as a fairly prominent bead right above the feet. And so that makes me think it needs to have a little bit of movement because of the curves, and it needs to be a little bit strong, meaning a largish trunk, because it has the heavier lip, the heavy feet, and the heavy thing. Someone had asked about the characteristics of the feet in forming or contrasting with the tree. What's cool about these old antique shapes are, notice how the feet are a little more towards the center. That makes the whole thing look so much less balanced and more dainty. Hinoki. I think this actually had a Hinoki in it when I first got the thing. We have quince. I would say if it were a quince, it'd be more of a Chinese quince, but no, even that I'd probably put glaze. I don't know what kind of a quince I'd put in that. Tall undulating juniper, not real fat. Yeah, if it had a tall juniper, but with crazy movement that straight up goes up and down, I think that'd be interesting. Chojubai rarely have a thick enough trunk to kind of work with this. Chojubai can have usually slender single trunks or sometimes multis, but much more often a lot of more stuff going on. I've never seen a ficus in this shaped pot, but I think that might be a neat fit if it had the right movement on it. And so see, as soon as you get these slightly less common shapes, you have so many fun things. Mark's asking about the size. Actually, I think the pot's right behind me. Is that true? This pot is about, yeah, there it is. It's about maybe 11, 12, 13 inches wide, something like that. Cool pot. Broom style elm. I've never seen broom style in these either. Broom styles look good with very stable pots because it's as if we're looking at a small version of a giant tree. And that's why we often see more stable, flat, lower to the ground pots. When they're raised up a little bit, there's a little bit of play in the branches, a little bit of tray in the trunks. Oh, the ginkgo. So a couple of ginkgo comments. Usually we see ginkgo in glazed pots, whether, I guess part of it would be if we're showing it in leaf in summer, in leaf in fall when they're yellow, or in winter when they're bare. You could probably get away. I'm kind of imagining my mind's eye. I think you could get away with the ginkgo in this if it was your normal flame style ginkgo, tons and tons of branches. And I think it might look best. It might look nice in different seasons. A little bit more delicate. Again, flame style I like in a little more solid thing, solid container. So less kind of upright feet. Yeah, more chichi ginkgo. Okay, everyone wants ginkgo. If anyone has a ginkgo for me to buy, I'll buy it and put it in the pot, and then we can see what it looks like. So yeah, we'll have to give that a try. All right, let's see what else we have here. Here we go, an old beauty berry. That'd actually be interesting. So shirokochi, or a glazed antique white pot. White pots often take on more cream colors over time. You can tell this is a really old pot because of the teeny tiny drainage holes at the far sides of the container.
Mm.
This is a good thing to consider when you're shopping for containers. And I know some of you out there have experienced this. It's pretty easy. It's relatively easy to find Chinese antique containers that are relatively affordable when they're super narrow front to back. And so, yes, this is a gorgeous pot. It's slightly hard to use because if you've spent 20 years growing a perfect nabari or surface roots that reach as far front to back as they do side to side, you're going to be really disappointed when you realize that it doesn't fit. So someone said old pomegranate. You could say old just about anything. And I would say yes, any old deciduous tree that you could possibly fit in here would look really, really good. Korean hornbeam would look fantastic in here. Trident would be another really obvious choice for it. Now, it is a little bit deep. Tridents are typically in very shallow pots, but of the pomegranates and hornbeam, you often see in deeper pots because they're more often collected and have funkier roots. Oh, Marcia/John's wondering oak for this. It's a little bit light for oak, but it does have that nice age. And so maybe a more sprawling shaped oak with a more slender trunk, but with interesting movement, a full silhouette, but with lots of gaps in the silhouette. That might look really pretty in this. And so I think that would look cool. Corkbark oak with a lighter foliage, little bit pretty for oak feeling. Oaks are kind of rough, but it might work. That big giant, the stripe and the splotch, or lack of glaze, I should say, in the very front, those actually might look kind of cool with something like that. It's kind of dramatic for azalea, but yeah, I think this actually could work with an azalea. We're pulling up the holly with red berries, silverberry, white bark, juniper. Juniper you wouldn't expect in a glazed pot as much, but the white bark juniper might be a good way to play up the unusual characteristics of that species. Camellia, yeah, actually, I think this would be totally fine for camellia. So notice it may seem hard when you're looking at a pot. Gee, what could I put in this? Just hearing what other people come up with, maybe you just need to go to the masses for ideas for what to do with your containers. I wanted to show just a few choices from the Koka-fu exhibit that are interesting trees and or interesting container selections. And the first is a white pine that's one of the more fascinating trees I'd ever seen. The lifeline actually shoots up to the top, zips back down, and then goes up again. And so the branch structure is even weirder than you think it is based on looking at this. And this is one of those trees where if you'd walked by, looked straight at the front of the tree, you'd never realize what's going on inside. The reason I put it here is that I really like this tree, and both for reasons of flow, reasons of design, as well as reasons of the pot selection. But I wanted to point out gray is a very common choice for white pine bonsai. And I'd say gray is also a little bit more common. You see it for Ezo spruce, similar feeling. And I'd say for California natives, gray has become one of my very favorite colors for coast redwoods. They just work in really solid, these just kind of plain gray containers. They did not go with any ornament on this pot. It has simple feet, a simple panel in front, a nice lip that plays up to some of the movement. But man, they're coast redwood, Morgan. There's so much drama in the trunk. You just want the pot to kind of set off the foliage and then let people enjoy the trunk of this one. Really beautiful tree. All right, Chojibai. Here we have our almost Minrai-like brightness. This is again from the Koka-fu exhibit. And this is one of those times where when you have a little bit of color on the tree, you want to find a color that's going to set that off. And so I'd say this turquoise would not be as effective were the tree totally bare. It might be a little too bright, but it's really good at kind of calling attention to the contrast in the flowers right there. A lot brighter, I'll note, that you would typically expect to see in the Koka-fu exhibit. You tend to see very, very old pots. It looks like an extraordinarily old stand it's on. It looks like an antique. It might actually be an old pot that just doesn't have a lot of patina, but it looks like it has some shine to it. And it's a little, yeah, it's a really interesting container. I mean, again, it's Koka-fu, so it's probably a $10,000 a pot. But yeah, I would love to see things like this over here. One note about the Chojibai, if I may indulge, not all Chojibai form interesting craggy bark. This one does. Notice that the craggy bark extends to the teeny tiny branches all the way out at the extremities. What makes this tree extraordinary, for those who don't like Chojibai, it might just look like a bush to you, but what makes it an extraordinary Chojibai is that you get the age all the way out to the tips. This thing has good genetics, good genes, and it is old and has likely been in training for a very long time. Really cool tree. This is what we're looking for in Chojibai. Chojibai is a form of, I don't know if Minrai had something in the Koka-fu, but Minrai does. Roy enters the pot competition every year at the Gafu 10 show for the last several years. So you see his containers. Sometimes he's, actually, I take that back. Yes, I think Taiga Urushibata used one of Roy's pots in I forget which show, but yes, Roy has shown up in great displays in one of the top shows in Japan recently. But to get back to the other, a Chojibai, I think that's what you're asking, is a dwarf Japanese flowering quince. The botanical name is Chionomeles speciosa chojubai, Chojubai. All right, let's see. I think I got a couple more. I wanted to show this tree, famous tree, root over rock, black pine. You can barely see the rock. This is a very classic pine-shaped pot, and it's a very classic pine pot color. And so this is about as conventional as you can get for a Japanese black pine. Brownish clay, this exact shape. This is just very conservative. Black pines have kind of a soft feeling often. They have great craggy bark and great age in the branch pads in this case. This is such a good example of a tree where you can kind of see between the branches to the craggy bark in the middle, and you get great depth in the design, but you can still see the age not only in the bark, but in the branch pads. So really neat tree. And I mostly wanted to just point out, this is just what you expect from pine bonsai. It's your starting point. And then if that doesn't float your boat, start picking something else. A lot of other pots can also work with black pines. Now, the shape of this pot will look familiar, and the tree is a trident maple. And so this is what I was saying about trident maples aren't often in deep pots. Enormous trunk, and it's in a very shallow pot. It looks like it's kind of floating out over the top of the thing or spilling out over the top, like there was a constriction around the sides of the pot. This is reminiscent of pots 2 and 3 on that first Japanese maple example that we looked at. And what I said is that shape might be better if it was a larger pot with a much fuller tree. Well, here's a larger by comparison pot in a much, much fuller tree. And I think it's much more appropriate. I think this would work in a lot of different colors for the tree, but neat old pot, neat old tree. What we look for in trident maples is no scars on the trunk and awesome, awesome branch density. And this kind of delivers on both counts. Really neat, super old looking tree. Super unusual style. And I'll say a fairly, I think it was a navy, that previous one, Pete. I think that was a navy pot. This is kind of an unusual choice, but it kind of works. In general, I would expect a tree with a much, much bigger trunk for this guy because the trunks are actually pretty small in this. But what I like about it is it's a cut corner square with panels and then double beads kind of along the bottom. Notice how the flared lip really calls attention to the kind of floating pads that stick out the sides. And I think that's why they went with it. It by being a little taller, it raises the tree up. By having stripes or beads and a panel on the pot, it doesn't look as big because now the largest surface we see on the pot is limited to what's inside the window. And that's one way to downplay the overall size of the pot without actually compromising on size. In other words, it makes a bigger pot feel a little smaller with those details on it. And when those details happen to help with the call attention to the branch design, it's kind of a neat choice. I would guess that would be a Gyozan container. It looks like one of his, probably an older Gyozan. And this might be the very last tree. This is a very, very famous tree. It's a Japanese beech that's extraordinary for every last thing about it, not the least of which is the container, which is a famous container in Japan. This is a bag or purse-shaped pot. It's worth about $250,000 if it's the one I'm thinking of. Yes, you heard that right, $250,000. You don't keep this on the bench in your garden. You take the tree out after the show and you put it back in the vault. And then you rent it to the next person because a lot of people have used this. It shows up in almost every Koka-fu show. I've seen this tree at a couple different exhibits in person, and it's actually not that big. I forget, 28, 30 inches tall. It's not an enormous tree, but if any of you have grown Japanese beech, you know that getting half of this density is incredibly difficult. And so the man who made this tree, Oishi is his name, he is a spectacular craftsman and quite a character, hilarious guy. He made this from air layer, actually. This is a chunk from a bigger beech, and he developed this for a very, very long time. And I think it's a good use of a bag pot or purse pot. Good luck repotting these if you leave the tree in there too long, because it's not super fun to cut the roots down to get it out. And so that's what apprentices are good for, is the backbreaking work of trying to carve your way through all that. And so I wanted to leave you this tree. That was kind of, I believe, the end of the program, and I'll be happy to answer some questions if you all would like while we're all still here. This, by the way, is a vendor table from, I believe this is one of Mr. Sakurai's stands. He's for many years been a vendor at the Koka-fu exhibit and other exhibits in Japan, and he will pretty much only have outstanding containers, and I drool over them every time I'm there. If you can afford them, buy them. They're amazing.
There is a question asking, what kind of tree would you put in that butterfly-shaped cream pot in the front?
Man, that'd have to be a really, actually, I would probably put something like the chirimen, so the dwarf Asian jasmine might look fun in there. Sometimes they have a really full silhouette, teeny tiny dark leaves, which are a good color to match that. And you can get some interesting trunk shapes in there, but probably a broadleaf evergreen with kind of an unusual trunk and maybe a fullish silhouette. That is a super weird pot. I do not see those in shows a lot and have go-to answers, but that's what comes to mind on that. Georgianne, where can you find some of these beautiful pots? Are they available online or in person? Where? Love pots that are different. So I can give you the brief where to find pots bit. It's kind of the same as where to find trees. So for trees, most of the best trees are not in nurseries. They're in private collections. And so you just need to visit a lot of gardens, go to a lot of shows, check out club sales, and then visit the gardens of people that do regularly have trees available. And you just have to kind of look in a lot of places. Pots were pretty lucky. I mean, you can actually buy pots directly online from Japan. And if you start doing searches for bonsai pots, or just ask people in your club, up and down the West Coast, we have actually a wonderful number of vendors who import pots, both Japanese and Chinese, and now sometimes Taiwanese containers that are just outstanding. And we have relatively local resources for them. So start there. There are a couple fantastic pot experts back east. And if I probably just mentioned one of them, I'll say that Matawinga Kaide-en Bonsai, he has just an extraordinary number of trees on his website. He's Kaide-en Bonsai, but his pots are all actually on eBay. You can find his eBay shot. Absolutely amazing material. And he'll give you a really good glance at what fair retail will be. He knows about as much as pots about anyone. And so he's always a good place to start. So that's the short version, Georgia Ann, about where you can find these things. I'm based in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so if you'd like, you're welcome to come by. I have been importing pots for a lot of years, and I've got a whole bunch of pots in the garden if you're ever looking for any. Putting a tree, mimicking the show pot, then placing it all in another pot. Oh, interesting. I have done the pot within another pot trick for trees in like mame pots or small pots. I don't typically want to submerge a show pot in a bigger pot because it might have an adverse effect on the patina. So it kind of depends on the show pot I use for it. I want them to develop as natural and beautiful a patina as possible. So what I might do is put a show pot on top of a bed of pumice. But in general, in this country, I'll say what most people do is we aren't as obsessive about ballet slipper style tiny pots for show trees in this country as much. And so you can find a reasonable show pot. And what I often recommend, keep it in a showish pot for maybe 1, 2, 3 years, and then put it in an oversized pot. If you keep trees in show pots forever, just about 100% guarantee that will get unhealthy over time. Am I going to TaiCon10 this year? No, so sadly I'm not, but a bunch of people are. So you will probably recognize some US bonsai folk at this year's TaiCon10. Maybe I'll get there this winter, but I've got plenty of other stuff keeping me busy this fall right now. Hard to find cream colored pots. Cream colored pots are, I don't know that they're any harder or easier to find than anything else. I think it's hard to find good quality glazed pots in general, even from my suppliers in Japan. It's getting really hard to find them, and not a lot of domestic potters are making refined pots. They tend to make deeper pots instead of shallower, and they tend to make brightly colored or rough textured pots. Those are just trends within North American bonsai. I don't know if that's more due to what people like, or what's easy to make, or some fun combination of them. What I have found is that the more a given potter makes a certain style pot, that certain style becomes popular and people start asking for it, and it becomes a self-fulfilling thing. And I think that's one why we have such a neat diversity of pots in North America. You're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome for all the thank yous. Oh man, don't ask me to spell Matawinga. Look for Kaide Bonsai N. It's Ouwinga is his last name. Matt, Ouwinga, but Owinga. Kaide-en, Kaide is the Japanese word for trident maple. Kaede, Kaide is the what we call a trident maple or three-tooth maple. And that's based on the leaf shape.
And what's the difference between Japanese and Chinese pots?
Oh, that's actually a good question. People do presentations just kind of on the characters of the pots. There are a couple things I can say that can help you home in on whether it's a Japanese pot or a Chinese pot. When you're a real pot expert, and I'm going to say if you're Matawinga, for instance, he's going to pick up a pot and know not only what country it came from, but what era it was made, and very likely who made the thing just by its build quality. But the cheat is to look at the bottom of the pot and start learning the chops, and that will end with the signatures, and that's going to tell you who made the pot. If I were to kind of generalize characteristics, if you're dealing with antiques, they're mostly Chinese. There are a very small number of old Japanese pots. And depending on if it's a 200-300-year-old pot, it's almost exclusively Chinese. If it's 100 years old, it might be Japanese, but it's more likely Chinese. when you get into what we think of as most bonsai pots made anywhere from really 50 years ago up to the present, the vast majority of the higher quality pots are Japanese, because a lot of what we've seen from China, what has been imported, have been more what I would call production quality pots. We have not seen as many handmade pots from China in recent years, but we do have them. And so a lot of larger, less detailed stuff would be new Chinese, and a lot of the more handmade stuff in recent years would all be Japanese. So there are some kind of patterns, but wow, does it come down to the maker? We've got so many different people. For those who want to find me, you can just Google Jonas and bonsai, and I'll probably show up. bonsaitonight.com is the website. My contact info is all on the website there. I also have a weekly newsletter. I don't know if you mentioned that at the start. I've got literally over 1,000 articles, and actually a lot of these pick the pot exercises. I've written posts on that, and I think I have a link to all of my previous pot exercises where you can see different trees in different containers. It's a great way to learn. So yeah, any of you are welcome to stop by, and you can look me up online pretty easy. Let's see what else we have. Fun comments. You're welcome. You're welcome. I do recommend you all try the quizzes of tracing these things on your own. It actually can be pretty educational. Here's a good question. What about pots with kintsugi? And that is when you have either a broken pot that is cracked, fallen apart, or been chipped, and the repair has been made with metal, most often gold. Yes, you actually do see this in very good shows in Japan, and more I see it in the US. There are actually some local craftspeople. I actually chipped one of my favorite pots very recently, and I'm looking for a kintsugi artist right now, and it's actually completely acceptable. If it's super dramatic and spiderwebby, you just need to decide, is it too much for the pot or is it an acceptable level? I think kintsugi repair is best when it's really subtle. So you see maybe one or two places with a little bit of metal in there. It just reinforces how darn old the pots are, and that looks really cool. Oh, good. Noah posted the link to Matt's website. So that's a good place to start. And yes, there are a lot of forgeries of old Chinese pots. And that's a really good reason why, if you're looking to buy antiques online, buy from a reputable source and make sure that you've got some multiple people in your club who can recommend someone for that. I can very easily recommend Matawinga. I've seen good forgeries of Chinese antiques and bad forgeries of Chinese antiques. And the very best forgeries of Chinese antiques to an untrained eye will be indistinguishable from the real thing. And I've definitely seen pots where I would defer to anyone who claims to be an expert on that, because while I know a lot about pots, I don't know a fraction of what the people who really go deep and specialize this in. It really is its own world, and it's a beautiful world. And I'd say, look up resources. Another good online resource to recommend, if you look up JapaneseBonsaiPots.net, that's a website from Michael Ryan Bell. He is one of the foremost authorities in the country on pots and potters, and he has an insanely detailed chop database. And so you can actually look underneath your pot and compare the chop you see or the mark you see to what he has on his website, and is an absolutely fantastic resource. I highly recommend it to any of you who are curious about it. And yes, I'll definitely write about it if I end up going the kintsugi route. Hi, back to you, Chris, as well. Any other questions? If not, we might be able to wrap this up, and I'll thank you all so much for participating tonight.
This was excellent, Jonas. Excellent. You had our largest viewership ever. So,
well, everyone needs pots for their trees, and so that's it's a good topic for folks.
It's very, very well done. I sure appreciate it.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining, and your feedback made this a lot of fun. I really enjoyed seeing the replies to the quizzes. I think you all did really well on that.
Thank you too, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for attending, and our next one will be the end of January, so be on the lookout for that.
Sounds great. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Jonas. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.